EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, July 27th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, James Risen, Pulitzer Prize winner, journalist, and author, co-author, I should say, along with Thomas Risen, journalist, co-author of The Last Honest Man, The CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys, and One Senator's Fight to Save Democracy. Meanwhile, the Fed raises rates to their highest levels since 2001, despite all metrics showing cooling inflation. And GDP is up in the second quarter of the year. But the European Central Bank is following our lead as well. They just raised rates for the 9th straight time. It's not going to end well. Israel's Supreme Court says it will review Netanyahu's far-right judicial overhaul bill that strips them of their power. So I think we can guess, what their position is going to be on it, but it's the clash that follows that will be what determines this. Meanwhile, Israeli forces kill a 14-year-old Palestinian in the West Bank, one of dozens of children killed by Israeli troops just this year. The Labor Department says illegal child labor is up 44% since last year, mostly migrant children. The DOJ and EPA launch a probe into telecom giants Verizon and AT&T over alleged contamination from toxic lead cables. House Republicans feud over the inclusion of an abortion pill mail ban in the annual ag bill, since that would obviously make it DOA in the Senate. Speaking of the Senate, McConnell had a medical episode at a press conference yesterday. Health concerns about him trickle out. There's been an apparent military coup in Niger, borders closed, ruling party headquarters burned. Something we'll be monitoring. Hunter Biden's plea deal blocked by a Trump-appointed federal judge. Stupid. And lastly, the EU Climate Monitor says July appears to be the hottest year on record, and for the U.S., the heat is shifting east in the coming weeks. Pray for our little bitty air conditioner. All this and more on today's Majority Report, or should I say, EmMajority Report. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. The last Thursday in July. Yes?
Wow, summer's...
it's flying by.
Yeah, really fast.
Summers, I think go by faster as an adult because there's no free time in the way than when you were a kid.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, you don't just have the entire summer. Or even when I was in grad school, it's like, oh man, I got 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, but now it's just like, wow, my commute is much more difficult because I'm sweating before I get here.
Yeah, I need to hug the building so I stay in the shade.
Yeah, so it really is flying by, and before the end of the year, we got to do another live show or something like that because just time is going so quickly. But I'm really excited about this interview today. Before we get to that, though, let's play this here. So, Jim Cramer is a known hack, right? I mean, years ago he was exposed as one by Jon Stewart. People can look up that clip. But he still has a job because, the news, even financial news, it's not really there to inform everybody. It's there for entertainment. And in the case of Jim Cramer, what he's there for is to take retirees' money and put it into the stock market through the promotion of fads in the economy, in my opinion. There have been analyses of his advice and shows that, yeah, if you followed it, you lost money. And yet the guy still out there spewing this crap. And what he says here makes it clear about how guys like him feel about the hot labor summer, the unionization push, and in particular, the UPS workers and Teamsters, the over 300,000 UPS Teamsters who came to this tentative agreement, which will be voted on Monday. Or on the 31st. I'm forgetting if that's Monday, but I think so. Yeah. This is his reaction on the financial news network CNBC to that agreement.
Be exaggeration.
A little exaggeration.
How about the way that UPS stock initially went up on that deal?
Yes.
And then people see that maybe the Teamsters got the best of it.
Although it's a good thing for the U.S. economy that there is not going to be a UPS strike.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was very important for the U.S. I do want to know whether Ford is going to talk about whether there's more of an issue with the UAW. Then Carol Tomei talked about being an issue with Teamsters. Very important to watch that, because when you look at the way GM traded, it started going down when Mary Barra, the CEO, glossed over the union issue. That's a big mistake. Sean Fain reminds me of the 1930s UAW, which we don't want. Dave, we also didn't mention...
Which we don't want. I love how even the host is like, okay, maybe their stock went down, but overall, we're talking like good that the largest North American unionized labor force is like got their concessions and isn't going to like shut down one of the three major mail carriers in this country, which would have chain effects for the other businesses that Cramer and other CNBC people are invested in. Like even though that's the big picture good thing for everybody involved, including these Wall Street types, Kramer's like, ugh, but labor got the best of them, and I don't know about that.
Because the only interest any of these people have in companies is a place to extract actual money. Mm-hmm. And the less that you have to pay the people that actually produce the things, the more that vampires like the people that Cramer represents can just take.
Well, they're worried about precedent. And so when he talks about like the UAW in the 1930s, I mean, that was the height of the like increase in labor power, particularly for auto workers, because low-cost vehicles started to be sold more frequently. The Wagner Act under FDR protected workers and their ability to organize, and so that created some of that influx. And like they showed, workers at that time exercised labor power in ways that were met with violence. Like there was a hunger strike at a Ford plant, and workers were killed with guns because of their actions there.
Like liberal type of economists, like Piketty and stuff, and all the way to like CNBC type of pundits, will say like it was good to have the middle class and the Great Contraction, and that was because of this type of militancy. It wasn't just because FDR decided like, oh, I'm looking at the charts and this is the best way to do things. It was because it was forced that way by militant labor action.
Yeah. And it just, I would love if we were at a point where labor had that power and created the vibrant middle class there that Matt references, right? The unions were important to the general prosperity. I mean, the most important mechanism to the general prosperity, arguably, of people during that time, the good old days that reactionaries kind of want to return to. As opposed to but just the cultural stuff where everyone dresses like John Hamm and Mad Men, and there's racial discrimination, right? I mean, and in part though, the robustness of the labor unions that he's referring to there, that was when unions started to get a little bit more racially integrated as well. So it's fun to see these guys freak out. And Jim Cramer, wrong about everything, wrong once again.
He's right about one thing, is that strikes are bad, and that's why ownership should give in to labor and avoid them.
Good point. All right, guys. Real quick word from our sponsor before we speak to James and Thomas Risen. GiveWell. GiveWell. Many donors wonder how much of an impact their donation can actually make. I'm sure people in this audience, socially conscious, minded in that way, you want to know if you have the ability, if you can make a difference. But it's hard to find information about whether a donation can do good, let alone how much. But if you're interested in making a meaningful difference for some of the poorest people in the world, check out GiveWell. They research evidence-backed, high-impact giving opportunities and share their work with everyone for free. GiveWell has spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations and only recommends a few of the highest impact opportunities that they've found. I mean, let's be real here. There's a lot of BS philanthropic organizations out there that are there for, tax cheating for certain people or for other wealthy people to put a little sticker on their shirt to say, hey, I'm a good person even though I don't want to pay any taxes. GiveWell's not gonna direct you to those kinds of organizations. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or organizations, and GiveWell does not take a cut. Here are some examples of what donations to GiveWell's recommended charities can achieve. Providing bed nets to prevent malaria. It costs about $5 to provide one net, and nets can reduce the number of malaria infections. Enough nets and a large enough drop in infections can save a life. It can save lives. It also helps provide medication for malaria. It's only $7 to provide a child with malaria treatment through the high malarial season. These treatments can reduce the number of malaria infections and, with enough treatments, also save a life in expectation. Give to givewell.org to find out more about making a donation, or just to find out more and think about it, put it in the back of your mind as well. If you make a donation, let them know you heard about us by choosing podcast and enter The Majority Report with Sam Seder. The Majority Report with Sam Seder at checkout. Again, that's givewell.com. Givewell.org. I apologize. Givewell.org. Givewell.org. Enter The Majority Report with Sam Seder at checkout after you select podcast. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Thomas and James Risen. We are back, and we are joined now by Jim Risen, senior national security correspondent for The Intercept, Pulitzer Prize winner and best-selling author, and Tom Risen, I should say, also a journalist, co-author of The Last Honest Man, The CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys, and One Senator's Fight to Save Democracy. I was telling them in the break, I don't always buy the physical book, but I did for this. I'm very excited to talk about it. It is right here. Thank you both for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So people in this audience may have heard references to the Church Committee kind of more recently, with the Republicans trying to frame this nonsense investigation into, Facebook and Twitter and suppressing Hunter Biden's intimate photos. Spoiler alert, it's crazy to make that comparison because of how monumental the Church Committee was. Can you explain, Jim, we can start with you, from a 30,000-foot view for our audience, what the Church Committee was, what its purpose was, and how important it was in uncovering what our national security establishment really does?
Sure. The Church Committee was a Senate committee created in 1975 to conduct the very first investigation of the CIA, the FBI, and the National Security Agency, and the rest of the intelligence community. It's hard to remember that prior to 1975, there was no oversight at all of the CIA or any other part of the intelligence community. And finally, because of a series of scandals, the Senate finally agreed to investigate the CIA. And Frank Church, the reason the committee is named the Church Committee is because Senator Frank Church from Idaho was the chairman. And he was a liberal Democrat who pushed the committee to really conduct an aggressive investigation of 30 years of CIA abuses prior to that. And the result was that because of all the disclosures by the Church Committee, we got a lot of reforms of the intelligence community, both at the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. New laws were passed, a lot of new executive orders and administrative rules were passed that really changed the nature of the intelligence community and brought it under the rule of law for the very first time. And today, the name the Church Committee has kind of become part of the political lexicon, as you mentioned. It's become a name that everybody wants to associate with because it's now a synonym for a major congressional investigation into a major scandal. And the irony is that Republicans who hated the Church Committee at the time and who tried to stop it from doing what it was doing now love the name the Church Committee.
And you talk about Frank Church and his background politically, him being such a liberal senator from Idaho. I mean, Tom, if you could just talk a bit about his career, what led him to the Senate, and how he, like a lot of Democrats at that time, he became increasingly, he turned against the Vietnam War, right? But he ran, much like JFK, as a Cold War hawk. And then that changed throughout his career. If you could just give us a sense of the trajectory of how he started and up into the point of the committee.
Yeah, well, Frank Church was always a political animal, and he ended up marrying the daughter of a former Democratic Idaho governor, Bethine Church, who was really the great co-star of this book, as we tried to give as much attention to Bethine Church as possible. She was more political than he was. She was just, the daughter of a governor, and she loved to talk. That's one of the reasons they were such a good match. And he beat cancer in the late 40s, and he kept on, he got a law degree, kept on being political. He says, I'm going to run for Senate. I almost died. And man, he won. He won running an honest campaign, which is one of the reasons he's such a rare politician. He just, you don't see that anymore for many, many reasons. But once he got to the Senate, he was pretty mainstream and conventional. But the more he saw, the more he realized, hey, wait a second, I'm going to do things differently. And he got more and more progressive. And the Vietnam War was really the turning point for him and for many Americans. Like my lifetime, I remember the war in Iraq got a lot of people political. So it was the same for that generation. And he took a trip to Vietnam in 1962, I believe, and he had served in China in World War II as an intelligence officer of the army, and he recognized government corruption and how unpopular the Chiang Kai-shek government was with its people, and he saw a very similar. He was not pleased with what he saw in Vietnam. He said, "Hey, this is a losing strategy. People don't want us here. This is, we're just another group of white people who are telling them what to do, like the French did, and they don't see us any differently." So he, that made him more progressive, and he came up against lots and lots of forces that were in favor of the war because they were status quo establishment, and he became less and less establishment, and largely because of what happened throughout the 1960s.
And it seems that he grew in resentment to the establishment, but that was this contradiction as well with his desire to be. I mean, he had, I believe, presidential ambitions. He was ambitious for sure. I mean, Jim, can you talk about also his relationship with JFK as that played into this evolution, and even if that was a part of the motivation for him in this investigation, experiencing what he did with that friendship as well?
Sure. Yeah, he got to know John Kennedy first in 1956 when Church first ran for Senate. Kennedy came to campaign for him, and they became friends in the Senate before Kennedy became president. Church then gave the keynote address at the 1960 presidential convention for the Democrats because Kennedy wanted him to. So he was the only president that Church was really friends with. But he began to turn against, as Tom said, he began to turn against the Vietnam War very early while Kennedy was still president after his visit there in 1962. And he was a little fearful of going public until after Kennedy's assassination. And then when Johnson became president, he became a very vocal, outspoken critic of the war. And then when Nixon became president, he was a full-throated opponent. And it was really his efforts to stop the funding for the war through a series of amendments called the Cooper-Church Amendments that made him a star in the Senate and in the anti-war movement. And it led him to believe, the Vietnam War ultimately led him to believe that the United States was becoming a militaristic empire, and that it had to be, that the growth of the national security state had to be curbed. And he began to realize that the intelligence community was at the heart of this growing militaristic empire in the United States.
Well, so that brings me to my next question about the nature of the CIA and the FBI in particular, which led to this investigation. Tom, could you talk a bit about how the CIA it started in the 1940s, but very quickly it became this international assassination enterprise and juggernaut, and it's really the only restraint on it was you just can't do this stuff on American soil. But I mean, what were the motivations behind the creation of the CIA? And how quickly did it ramp up into this like immensely powerful organization that then warranted this kind of oversight a few decades later?
Yeah, that's a lot happened before the main narrative of our book begins, and we kind of try to summarize it, but I think we do a pretty good job. And World War II ends 1945. America does not have an intelligence agency, and there's the old apocryphal quote, "Gentlemen, don't open each other's mail." And there's military intelligence. Frank Church was an army intelligence officer, but there was no comprehensive global intelligence service like the British and the French and the Germans had. And America's stepping into its role as a world power. We're no longer isolationist. Harry Truman's pretty reluctant, but eventually in 1947 he says, "Okay, we'll have an intelligence agency." And he brings back a lot of the OSS people from World War II who were just kind of sitting around waiting for something to do. And they are very, very worried about containing communism. But Harry Truman showed restraint. He was really the only president before the 70s who shows restraint, because Winston Churchill comes to him and says, "Hey, I want to stage a coup in Iran to uphold Britain's oil monopoly." He says no. Eisenhower says yes. Eisenhower is the shifting point. Harry Truman wanted to curtail the power of the CIA, so he put a very bright line: don't operate inside the United States. But the rest of the 1947 Act is very vaguely worded. To this day, they use other matters related to national security as a loophole for all sorts of stuff. And the Iran coup in 1953 kind of whetted their appetite to say, hey, we don't have to have a full-scale war. We can, use covert action to undermine communism around the world, because they were worried about the spread of communism. But and so it became a global force for power, and there were ties with corporate America because the people running the agency in those early days were rich, elites, connected. Not a lot of people went to college. It was kind of a small job pool. That's one of the reasons that they had that makeup in the early days. But tons more people go to college today. It's not as much like that as it used to be. But that kind of lent itself to becoming a force of shadow American power for pretty much until the 1970s, when people finally started to pay attention.
Right, and Jim, can you expand on the Eisenhower of it all? I mean, what his approach was, what he saw the CIA as in terms of filling a vacuum of colonialism collapsing.
Yeah, I think, as Tom said, Truman saw it really as just as an intelligence gathering collection point. He wanted a central place in the government for intelligence analysis and reporting. But Eisenhower, who had been the commander in Europe in World War II, wanted to avoid a full-scale war with the Soviet Union. And he began in the 1950s to rely on the CIA to conduct covert actions, which he saw as a way to conduct U.S., to get what the U.S. wanted around the world without going to war with the Soviets. And so he allowed the CIA to conduct a series of coups, both in Guatemala and Iran, and then later to try to do that in Cuba and elsewhere, and Congo. And he was committed to turning the CIA into a presidential weapon. And it was really Eisenhower who transformed the CIA into what it became later. And under his CIA director, Allen Dulles, the agency was completely transformed into a covert action arm of the U.S. government. And it never changed. It stayed that way after Eisenhower and Dulles left. And that was what that was the heart of why Congress needed to conduct oversight through the Church Committee, because that had happened, that change in the CIA had happened without any public debate and without any congressional oversight.
Was that in part due to, well, at least in terms of the oversight of the FBI, was that in part due to J. Edgar Hoover's looming presence of, and either of you can take this if you'd like, of he died in 1972, he died in office, and he had blackmail on like a bunch of people, including JFK, which we can get into. But I mean, like that was partly, I would say, I would imagine, the big chilling effect before the Church Commission a few years after his death.
Right. That was, in fact, there were people on the Church Committee who said to us, including Walter Mondale, who was a member of the committee, who I interviewed before he died. He said, we never would have investigated the FBI if J. Edgar Hoover was still alive. And it really changed. The FBI was a cult of personality for most of its existence under J. Edgar Hoover. And when he died, it really liberated a lot of people in the FBI to begin talking to Congress. And the Church Committee was really the first time they really had an opportunity to do that. And they began, the Church Committee focused primarily on how the FBI under Hoover had harassed and tried to abuse Martin Luther King Jr. Throughout the 1960s. And then they found a number of other issues too, but the two big hallmark investigations of the Church Committee at the CIA, it was the assassination plots against foreign leaders by the CIA, and the FBI. The biggest investigation was the investigation into the FBI's efforts to discredit and harass Martin Luther King.
So let's dive into some of the findings there, if you'd like, that you just alluded to. Well, actually, I have another question really quickly before we do that. Was Church himself fearful of being assassinated?
There was some evidence that he was facing physical threats. The first time was from another investigation that he did at the same time, but it wasn't part of the Church Committee. He was doing a separate investigation through another committee of Lockheed bribes to foreign leaders. And in Japan, a group of right-wing ultra-nationalists were so angry that they threatened to kill Church. And he got some protection for that. But that was, as far as I know, that's the only time that he got an actual death threat.
There was one committee staffer who said that he was worried he was going to get shot because of the investigations into the Kennedys, but it seems like it was just Washington in the mid-1970s. It was a more dangerous place than it is today. And
but what we may want to get to, though, is that 3 of their witnesses were murdered.
Yes. So let's just get to that, right? I mean, your book also, the Mafia is in the subheader, right? And the book spends time looking back at essentially how 2 mobsters were assassinated, one before testifying in front of the Church Committee, and one commission. Gosh, I don't know why I keep doing that. Commission and one afterwards. Talk a bit about that. Either of you can take that.
Yeah, Tom, you want to talk about?
Yeah, the way we did this is we divided research on different topics. He took Chile, I took Congo, I took the Mafia. He interviewed Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale led the FBI investigation, by the way, so he was well positioned to talk about Hoover. But the Mafia by the 1970s was in a big transition point because Prohibition was the 20s, the 30s and 40s was, another transition. So a lot of Sam Giancana, who had been one of the bosses of Chicago, and Johnny Rosselli, who was kind of a freelancer who knew everyone. He was the guy these are the 2 Mafia figures who were the most prominent in the plots to kill Fidel Castro. The Mafia obviously had casinos in Havana and interests in Latin America, but mostly Havana. And so CIA, not unreasonably, thought, hey, they don't like Castro either. Let's enlist them. And enlisting them to kill Castro is a step too far. The Mafia, the government to this day talks to organized crime. Do you know anything? Maybe whatever. But asking questions is one thing. Trying to get them to kill people is another. That's too far. And so Johnny Rosselli was the one who passed it. Trusted message, he was the one everyone trusted, and he passed messages between the bosses. So he wasn't a boss, but he was kind of like a regional manager. And Sam Giancana had been the boss of Chicago, so Johnny Rosselli thought he had to bring him in. And Sancho Trafficante is another mob boss from Tampa. They're operating in Florida trying to kill Castro, so you had to bring in Florida because he has to, pay homage to the bosses or whatever. And by the mid-1970s, Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosselli are already on shaky ground. They're aging. They're not making money. You have to keep making money for organized crime, otherwise you're no longer useful. And they're bringing a lot of heat. They're both facing legal cases.
And just so the audience knows, I mean, part of this resentment towards Castro as well was because he shut down the mob-run casinos when he took power in Cuba.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so the plot, just to step back, the CIA in the early 1960s formed an alliance with the Mafia to try to kill Castro. It started under Eisenhower and it continued under Kennedy. And so, as Tom said, Johnny Rosselli, Sam Giancana, Sancho Trafficante were all working with the CIA in Miami to try to kill Castro. And then that stayed hidden for more than a decade. And it was only when the Church Committee came around in 1975 that all this became public through their investigation.
It's notable that Lyndon Johnson found out when he became president. He didn't tell anybody. So, this was not entirely a huge secret. But, and he was worried about, there's the whole JFK assassination conspiracy theory because the Mafia was involved trying to kill Castro. But we didn't really get into that's a whole other thing.
Right.
But, so Johnny Rosselli and Sam Giancana were the two witnesses who got killed. Sam Giancana, they were already on shaky ground with the Mafia, so we think that it was kind of the last straw that they had been requested to testify before the Senate, and they thought, that's it, let's get rid of these guys. We think that was the situation. But Sam Giancana was killed in his house before he testified. Johnny Rosselli lived and testified in the Senate a couple of times for the Church Committee about his role. And Senator Traficante skipped the country. We think he went to his villa in Costa Rica or something and kind of laid low until the committee was done. But yeah, they were the two witnesses that were murdered, and they couldn't help but wonder if somebody had gotten rid of them because they were testifying about the plots to kill Castro.
And what was the Mafia connection as well to the lots of names spinning in my head, but the mistress of Sam Giancana, if you don't
Judy
mind.
Campbell. Judith Campbell.
Yes. Sam Giancana was this is all back in the early 1960s when he was working with the CIA to kill Castro. One of his mistresses was a woman in Los Angeles named Judith Campbell. Judith Campbell also happened to be sleeping with President Kennedy. She would travel to Washington occasionally. And when, the great crazy story behind this whole plot to kill Castro using the Mafia is that it all began to unravel within the US government when these mobsters were working with the CIA in Miami Beach, and Sam Giancana got worried that Judith Campbell, his girlfriend, was sleeping with Dan Rowan, who is a stand-up comedian in Las Vegas, who later became famous for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In TV show. And so he wanted to go to Las Vegas to confront his girlfriend and Dan Rowan. And Robert Mayhew, who was an ex-FBI agent who was running the team of the CIA Mafia team to kill Castro, convinced Giancana to stay in Miami, and he would send a private investigator to Las Vegas and wiretap his girlfriend to see if she really was sleeping with Dan Rowan. And so Giancana agreed to stay in Miami, but then the private investigator and his wiretap equipment all got discovered by a maid at the hotel. The police were brought in, he was arrested, and it all led back to Robert Mayhew and Sam Giancana and the CIA and the Mafia. And the FBI found out about it. This is all in the early 1960s. And J. Edgar Hoover used it as blackmail against John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, because he was able to pull threads that showed that Judith Campbell was sleeping both with Sam Giancana and President Kennedy. And the fact that he now knew that Kennedy shared a mistress with the Chicago mob boss gave him a lot of insulation in blackmail to get the Kennedys to let him do what he wanted.
Is there direct evidence of him using that blackmail, or what is it just essentially implied, and that the Kennedys stepped off and let Hoover do his thing, particularly when it came to the surveillance of Martin Luther King?
There were meetings and there were memos inside the FBI where Hoover and his staffers were talking about how he was going to present this evidence to Robert Kennedy, who was then the Attorney General, and then also was going to present it directly to President Kennedy in a meeting in 1962. So there's no doubt that he told the Kennedys what he knew, and that not too long after that, the Kennedys approved what Hoover wanted, which was to wiretap Martin Luther King. So it's a fairly direct, there's fairly strong evidence making that connection.
Certainly. And how did that revelation? I mean, what was Hoover? What was his approach to the CIA? I mean, this was the CIA doing this something domestically here, obviously. Yeah. I mean, so was there? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, he hated the CIA. He didn't want it to be created back in the 40s. He fought Harry Truman over the creation of the CIA. He thought the FBI should run foreign intelligence. He, in fact, after Harry Truman created the CIA, he gave dirt on Truman to his opponent in the 1948 race, Thomas Dewey. He was really furious over the creation of the CIA, and he did everything possible for the rest of his life to try to drag his feet whenever it came time to cooperate with the CIA. And
that's a glaring intelligence failure, by the way. These agencies need to work together, and we're still trying to make that happen.
Right.
Yeah. Now that we've kind of touched on the Martin Luther King surveillance a few times, what were the church the church committee's findings when it comes to Martin Luther King? Tom, you can answer this. What was so new for the American people to hear this coming out of this committee?
Well, part of it is a generational thing, which played out with the senators on the committee were pretty surprised because it was this deference to authority from people born before World War II, where they trusted the government and they thought, oh, the government has our best interests, and that was obviously a generation. The baby boomers were the first to really question the government in a big way. And but what senator was it? The old senator that was dying of cancer on the committee? Philip Hart gave a very moving speech after the FBI testimony where he said, my kids were trying to warn me that the FBI was trying to trample anti-war protests and civil rights protests, and I didn't believe them, but I should have. I was wrong. And people cried in this meeting because it was kind of a cathartic realization that, you know, people had whispered about it, but this was evidence that he had tried to suppress the Black Panthers and this, you know, Martin Luther King's civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and, you know, all of this. COINTELPRO was the name of the program. All this evidence came out, and people were kind of shocked. And so he, you know, most infamously sent an anonymous letter to Martin Luther King, telling him, "Hey, we have audio of you cheating on your wife, and we're gonna reveal it unless you kill yourself." And so that was Hoover's favorite trick. He would send a lot anonymous letters to people trying to plant ill will and create paranoia in protest groups. And so the plot to kill Castro with the Mafia and the plot by the FBI to undermine or neutralize, as they said, the civil rights movement were the two big headline grabbing stories that came out of the church committee. There's lots and lots of revelations, but those are the two ones that got the most attention.
I think that the American people knew almost nothing about what Hoover had done to Martin Luther King prior to the church committee. And pretty much all of the facts that we now know today about what the FBI did to Martin Luther King came originally from the church committee.
I mean, and that's just, that alone, it makes the church committee probably the most successful one of these committees. And then there was all this other stuff included. I mean, talk a bit about the role that Watergate played in allowing for this to go forward. And particularly its focus on Tom Huston of the Nixon White House.
Yeah, and Watergate had broken open, you know, the break-in at the Watergate offices of the Democratic National Committee happened in June 1972. And the Watergate scandal then slowly built over the next couple of years, leading finally to Nixon's resignation in 1974. But it was a scandal, kind of a slow-moving scandal for a while, and finally, when it finally broke and led to Nixon's resignation, the nation was really altered, transformed, and Americans were much more suspicious of the government than they had been prior to Watergate. And they became really questioning of things that nobody had really questioned before. And so that had happened. The Watergate had just ended a few months before the Church Committee was created. And that set the tone and the climate for the attitude and the political climate that Frank Church walked into. The country was much more open to a deep investigation of the CIA and the FBI than they ever were before. And so that was really a benefit for the Church Committee. On the other hand, there was some element of the people who were exhausted by Watergate. And so to some degree, the Church Committee didn't get as much attention because people were exhausted by Watergate. But at the same time, it was allowed to, people were open to the investigation because of Watergate. So it was kind of a two-edged sword.
And the Tom Huston revelations.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
There had been a number of parts of Watergate that had never really been fully investigated at the time of Watergate. There were a lot of things that came up briefly and then went away because the central issue about Watergate ultimately boiled down to, is Richard Nixon guilty of a cover-up? And once Nixon resigned, a lot of the side issues that had slowly surfaced kind of went away. And the Church Committee began to look into some of these. In fact, there was a lot of interest at the time in the role of the CIA in Watergate and the role of the intelligence community. And there had been this one guy who was a lawyer in the White House under Nixon named Tom Houston, who had supposedly been the mastermind of a plan to get the entire intelligence community to spy on Nixon's enemies. But what the Church Committee found was slightly different, was that they began to investigate that more thoroughly. And what they found was that Tom Houston was kind of a patsy, a young lawyer in the White House who was being used by the FBI and the CIA and the NSA to let them do what they wanted to do, which was spy more on Americans. And so that was an interesting twist to show that the Watergate investigation had missed or misunderstood a lot of the things that were cropping up at the time, and the Church Committee kind of tried to delve into them more deeply.
Your book also, and Tom, not sure if you'd like to take this or not, but there's these new details that hadn't been revealed before about Daniel Ellsberg's role in working with the committee, if you don't mind telling our audience a bit about that.
Yeah, he had tried to share the Pentagon Papers with people in the Senate, including the Senate.
Fulbright. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Senator Fulbright, who was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee at the time. Fulbright Scholarship. Very famous lawmaker. And Fulbright was much more establishment than Church. And Church had actually pushed Fulbright to the left on Vietnam, like the Fulbright hearings that discussed the strategy and the relevance of the Vietnam War to Americans. That was because Frank Church had pushed the committee to the left to do these hearings. So, but Fulbright was also jealous of Frank Church because he was young and he was progressive and he was getting attention. And Fulbright was wary of his reputation, and he thought that if he disclosed the Pentagon Papers, that would destroy his reputation, that he'd be guilty of, there was this whole, they went to the Supreme Court, the Pentagon Papers case. He was worried that he would be, arrested or something. So he buried it and so this happened a couple times when he got secret information, and he kind of passed it on to intermediaries, or he sat on it, but he was too afraid to do anything with it himself.
Later, I think what you were referring to later was when Ellsberg came to Church when he was running the Church Committee in 1975, and also gave some documents about the Kennedy administration's knowledge of the Diem coup in Vietnam in the early 1960s, and how the President Kennedy had direct knowledge of that the coup was going to take place and may have known that he was going to be assassinated.
Yeah, I mean, and I almost forgot to talk more about some of the coup and assassination plots that were uncovered. I mean, you mentioned Iran. There's Guatemala. There's the Congolese president, I believe, as well. If either of you don't mind, just speaking about some of those findings.
Hey, Tom, why don't you talk about Lumumba?
Yeah, what's interesting, as I pinpointed, September 1960 was a very busy month because CIA chemist sent poison pills. Botulinum was the poison they were going to use. It was a highly concentrated dose that would have given, a nerve attack and basically shut down your nervous system and killed you slowly. It was supposed the poison they chose was something that would kill them slowly enough for the assassin to escape. So they sent in September 1960 poisons to Cuba to kill Castro and to Congo to poison the ousted Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. And one of the factors there was Congo to this day is a huge country with natural resources, and the CIA and the Eisenhower administration kind of wanted to keep Congo on side in the Western camp instead of just a neutral nation. Like neutrality was not something the CIA was in favor of. You're either with us or against us, that whole language. So they thought Lumumba is friendly, but he's not friendly enough. We have to get rid of him. So they staged a coup, put Joseph Mobutu in charge. And even when he was gone, they thought, okay, Lumumba's too charismatic. We have to get rid of him. He could talk his way back into power. And so they kept trying to poison him. But eventually, they just thought it was easier to help Mobutu kill him. So they found he was going to be transferred to a different prison where his, where he would not be as safe. And he was eventually killed by his captors with the help of Belgium. But the CIA did not directly kill Lumumba, but they were complicit, which is kind of the story with a lot of CIA conspiracies. You think the CIA directly did something, but they kind of were involved and enabled it, were complicit in it. And that was, so they thought that was part of the covert action arm to help maintain status quo in favor of the West.
I mean, let alone the, hundreds of assassination attempts on Castro's life? We should mention that, right? That's just some of what was uncovered here. Before I let both of you go, I'm wondering if either of you want to just reflect on what the church committee's role and its legacy is as we look at our intelligence agencies in the modern day, because obviously this was the first moment of accountability and oversight. But we're still in an era where there is a deep state, not in the way Trump talks about it, like going after liberals or whatever, but there is a government within the government doing influencing other democratic elections abroad, operating and working on their own to do what they feel is best for American empire. So what is the major takeaway you would hope that people have from the legacy of the church committee?
I think the committee really, as I said earlier, there had been no oversight at all. And so it's hard to remember just how rogue the intelligence community was at that time. If we were going to have a deep state, it was on its way to being a deep state until the church committee came in and began to conduct oversight. And the disclosures of all of the abuses that they found forced changes in the law and changes in administrative and executive rules that really brought the CIA and the rest of the community under the rule of law for the first time. And it also led to the creation almost immediately of permanent intelligence oversight committees in both the House and the Senate. And that made a big change. So for the very first time, these agencies were under the rule of law. That didn't mean that they weren't going to keep trying to do, to abuse, conduct abusive actions around the world. But now there was a mechanism in place to try to hold them into account. And I think that's the legacy of the church committee. They set down rules of the road for the intelligence community. which the intelligence community very often violates. And so we probably need a new church committee to look at these issues all over again. But I think it played a historic role in stopping a slide towards imperialism that we were on at the time. And we, as I said, we probably need another one now to.
Well, I mean, your work where you won the Pulitzer, Jim, was investigating the warrantless wiretapping by Bush,
Right.
and then the subsequent crackdowns on press freedom by the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Like, it just goes to show that we are still in an era of unprecedented lack of disclosure,
Right.
and we do need another church committee, but just not one that's about, Hunter Biden's
Right.
crack pipe or whatever.
Right. It's a very odd moment we're in right now because for the first time in my memory, you have Republicans who hate the intelligence community and who believe there is a deep state, but they do it for these weird kind of partisan reasons that have nothing to do with the truth or facts. And so, but it would be nice if we could get some kind of political consensus in America to say we need to reform and investigate in a real way the power of the intelligence community again.
Any last thoughts, Tom, before we let you go?
Yeah, it was the government was definitely, they call it the House Weaponization of Government Committee, and that was what was happening before the 70s. Even the Food and Drug Administration and the IRS were being used as tools by intelligence agencies. And there's so much more transparency and warrants and paper trail, and you can't just do this. Like the Bush administration was kind of an abnormal example where they didn't go through the process that usually favors them. At least you go through a process like the FISA court. But and that is a huge step forward. But my message is bipartisanship was key to the church committee's success. The Republicans and Democrats worked together, and they thought they were going to be digging up dirt on Nixon because it was in the wake of Watergate. But of course, they found out that Kennedy and Johnson had committed abuses of power as well. So be careful what you wish for if you start digging around what the government's doing. You might find something unexpected.
Absolutely. James Risen, Senior National Security Correspondent for The Intercept. Thomas Risen, also journalist, co-authors of The Last Honest Man, The CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys, and One Senator's Fight to Save Democracy. Thank you both so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, and we will put the links to the book. This is the book here. I love holding up I love having a prop. We'll put a link to the book in the description wherever you're listening to or watching this, and at majority.fm. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the first hour of this program, head into the fun half. We'll be taking your calls, reading your IMs. You might have noticed, usually I've been having 2 guests on Thursdays, but I wanted to give that.
And we had
ample
2
time.
guests this time.
We
too.
did, actually, true. Right. We did. So we did not break the rule.
I thought
2
we were
guests, 1
following
subject.
form. I thought we were following form, and then I realized, they're both Risens.
Yes. Not sure if anyone picked up on that, but son and father. I thought that was a nice touch as well. Just a reminder, this show relies on your support. If you can, please become a member at jointhemajority.report.com so you can see cool interviews like that, honest analysis of what our government is actually doing.
Pay for our raises.
Yes, please. And all that, as well as support Just Coffee. This is the last day of their sale, last day that you can get 25% off at justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, and chocolate. Not using the coupon code majority, which you can usually get a discount on. Now you can get a bigger discount with the code MR25. Just Coffee. There's a sale last day today. 25% off with the code MR25. And for ESPN, we've reached 10,000 subscribers. Yay! And you know why? What we're going to do for that? Bradley's not going to light himself on fire, which he keeps saying he's going to do for some reason. We have a very special guest on Monday. And I will reveal that on Monday. Yeah. Gonna hype it up for a little bit. An athlete, like a real player, going to be joining us on Monday, unless that person cancels. Anyway, so that's kind of why I'm waiting. It's not just the suspense. I'm just like, don't want to jinx it. So that's the hype to celebrate 10,000. But on ESPN, we did speak about the running back labor action. We talked, what else? Oh, the sale of the Commanders by Dan Snyder and like the role of the congressional investigation into that, as well as other things, youtube.com/ESPN show. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Max Alvarez of Working People Pod on to talk about the Teamsters tentative deal, and also we went deep on Ron DeSantis' little chin wag, as Russell Brand calls it, with Russell Brand, and how if Russell Brand was still the provocative wag that I used to enjoy when I listened to him on BBC Radio 6 and BBC Radio 2, he would have brought up the Guantanamo thing. Instead, he just brought up of how adored Ron DeSantis is and how much Florida pride people have.
I know, I saw some of that. It's embarrassing.
It's really sad, but he is Russell Brand is now an asset of Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 6, aka Rumble.
Lots of people, apparently, those assets is what I'm hearing.
A lot of money being splashed
some rumblings.
out.
Even to people on the left is what I'm hearing rumblings about.
Interesting.
Or who present themselves as on the left.
I would have hoped that people like disclose that sort of thing. Like, for instance, if they bring in David Sachs, is that his name, to talk about how Silicon Valley Bank needs a bailout. I would hope you would disclose your sort of business relationships like that. I'll just say, we don't take any Rumble money. We tried to take money from, what was that other one? Do you remember this, Bradley? There was like a crypto thing we were trying to do for a little bit, but we didn't get any like money out of it, because I think in order for these crypto like platforms to work, you need to have a good deal with the actual runners of the thing. It's not actually anybody can sign up and then start making money. It turns out you actually need to maybe know the venture capitalists that are putting the money behind these things. So anyway, a little bit off track, but we also got into, speaking of that, in the post game, Jimothy Dore, no longer confining his fire to Democrats, is now going after Cornel West for not being pro-Russia enough. And also...
or does it have anything to do with the fact that he left the People's Party platform?
No, it's just because he's...
it's just principle.
It's just that Jimmy would do better against Anderson Cooper. And also Jimmy not happy with Starbucks union workers, thinking that they also suck at messaging. And, this is on the heels of him coming out against the Chicago teachers as they tried to stop what ended up leading to a bunch of deaths of kids, which is the Omicron wave. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to hear our discussion with Jim about Jimmy Dore.
All right, well, we don't have Binder and Brandon yet, so we'll just head into the fun half, but check out Doom, Scam Economy, The Discourse, Leftist Mafia as well. Check all that stuff out. They're great shows as well. We'll head into the fun half now. See you there. The number is 646-257-3920. Bye-bye.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflakes says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? What? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.